Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and Little Rock Public Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Arkansas Week. I'm Chris Kane. In the third week of the Arkansas General Assembly, some key priorities for the governor were introduced, including a work requirement for Medicaid recipients, and we'll get into that, including a challenging forecast for Arkansas farmers in just a little bit. But first, on what was declared Mental Health Day, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders spoke Wednesday at the state capitol about cell phones in schools and her goal of eliminating them from bell to bell. While touching on the success of pilot programs already in place, Sanders encouraged policymakers to pass a recently filed bill that would ban cell phones in all public schools in the state. Joining us is one of the sponsors of that legislation, State Senator Tyler Dees, a Republican from Siloam Springs. Senator, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And please share first what would make you want to champion this proposed law.
Well, I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for letting me come on today and talk about this very important piece of legislation that we've been working on for well over a year now. I can tell you, I have the joy to represent Northwest Arkansas. I think, the furthest legislator from the Capitol, but I've heard from all over the state, from parents, from administrators, from superintendents, from teachers, about the importance and the need for this piece of legislation. We're calling it Bell to Bell No Cell Act. And really what this is a response to the overwhelming data that we're seeing where our kids are really being harmed. And our kids deserve every advantage we can give them. We have a constitutional charge to provide fair and adequate and a great education for our students. And so what this does is it's a cell phone prohibited ban from bell to bell, from the start of the day to the end of the day, so that students can really focus, so they're not distracted, so they're not being bullied, so they're not being constantly sent the communication and notifications from social media and from other students, and so they can focus and achieve success and performance in the classroom.
I mentioned there has been a pilot program already in place. Can you give some background on what that involved and what have been the results so far?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, Chris, my family, this is direct for me. I mean, I'm a young father with three kids of school-age children that this impacts directly. And we've seen the need for this even in our own home. But the pilot program that the governor launched this last year was just such a great step forward. In fact, we had great participation from schools across the state. The majority of schools signed up. And the data we're receiving from that pilot program is proving that this is working. When we limit cell phones in schools, the data comes back and shows us that missed assignments go down, that engagement goes up, that disciplinary issues go down, that teachers feel heard and they can actually do their job. We have statistics that show unbelievable response from this. And that's what's led to us to step in with the legislation this session. Chris, I want to tell you that this is actually well received. 73% of voters say we've got to do something about this. I'm referencing a Manhattan Institute survey that shows that we've got almost half of Gen Z adults, 18 to 27-year-olds, looking back at their experience has said, we wish TikTok and Snapchat had never been invented because it was completely deteriorating our time and our focus and really our mental and social and emotional health. And so that's what this bill aims to do, is to arm and protect our students and arm our school districts with just another tool to help them do that.
As with everything, there is context, and we did see there are some exceptions that could be used in this instance and in this bill. What would those exceptions be?
Sure. The people that sent me here, Chris, they've sent me here to work on common sense legislation. And that's what this does. We want to make the bill to be very usable and relatable. And so what this does is it provides exceptions for students with medical documented needs. We know there's some students that need to be tracking their medical alerts, and so it does not prohibit any of that. We also know that there's special needs with some students, and so we've made exceptions there. We've also made exceptions for times of emergency. We know in the very small rarity of cases, there's unfortunate instances in schools where there's a fire or a tornado or God forbid, an active shooter. And so we've made carve outs where there's emergency clauses where exceptions can be made for devices. And so we've tried to think through and work with multiple school districts across the state to make sure that this policy is well intended. I also want to say, Chris, that we've intentionally made this to be full of local control measures. We never want to be heavy-handed. We want to make sure that we're providing insight. We've listened to the school districts. They've asked for help. That's why we're doing this. But we're also saying, you know what? Each school district in the bill, it says you're involved to make the policy and execute the policy that fits your school district. So, for example, you get to decide, school district, if you want to have a pouch system or a locker system or off and away in your backpacks. You get to implement however this fits best for your district. Same with student violation policy. Whatever makes sense for your school district, you get to decide. And so we want to put a lot of the oversight and the ability to execute back in the hands of the local control.
And certainly for months, the governor has been sharing concerns about cell phones and kids, citing a best-selling book, The Anxious Generation, in this. Has there been much pushback against this? We know there are two sides to every bill and every story, but like you said, it seems like overwhelmingly there has been a lot of support. But what has been any pushback, if there has been?
Well, I'll tell you, you referenced Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And I've had the privilege of going to our schools in my district, in our state, with the author of Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt. And we've been able to speak directly with teachers, with administrators, with students. And there's been overwhelming support. I mean, this is a 90-10 plus issue. But, some of the pushback we do here is, why doesn't this bill address private schools? And why doesn't it address homeschools? Well, I can tell you, Chris, that that's not our jurisdiction. We have a constitutional charge, our legislature, to make sure we provide a fair and adequate education for our public school students. And it's not our job to implement policy decisions for private schools, and definitely not for homeschools. In fact, the LEARNS Act in the last session provided opportunities for students and for parents and families to partake with their own tax dollars. But that didn't mean a green light for the state to be involved in what goes on in private schools and how they run their schools, or definitely not homeschools. But I can tell you, I have not found one private school that doesn't have something very similar to this policy already on the books. But that's some of the pushback we received. But I can tell you, it's overwhelmingly supported, bipartisan supported, across our legislature as well.
State Senator Tyler Dees out of Siloam Springs. State Senator Dees, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to this week's program. Joining us now for more on the proposed cell phone ban and other recent activity in the legislative session are reporters Andrew DeMilla with the Associated Press and independent journalist Steve Bronner. Welcome both of you to the program, and thanks for taking time out of your busy days to join us. And Andrew, let's get started with you joining us virtually today. And I think this is something that has gotten some attention nationally as well. Tell us more about your reaction to this cell phone proposal.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. The cell phone proposal from Governor Sanders, this is part of what's really been kind of a growing bipartisan movement that you're seeing among several states. At least 8 states right now have similar bans, and you're seeing states controlled by both parties really endorsing similar measures. This is probably the only policy proposal where you'll see Governor Sanders and Gavin Newsom from California on the same page. And a big part of this is concerns that we're seeing and the discussion about mental health impacts that screen time and social media have on kids right now, and also concerns about what it does in the classroom. And we're seeing several other states where there are similar measures being pushed right now. And in addition to this, also got multiple states that are encouraging or trying to incentivize this, if not flat out require it.
And Steve, I know this is something you followed with one particular school district who implemented something similar even before this bill was filed.
That's right. Bentonville West High School started this about 2 years ago. We had the pilot program the past year where about half the school districts have had students locking up their phones in pouches. Bentonville West started this 2 years ago. It was one of the guinea pigs of this, and they had a lot of success with it. Compared to the previous year, verbal and physical aggression offenses fell 57%. Personal electronic device offenses, where they had the phone when they were not supposed to, went down 94%. And drug-related offenses, such as THC vapes, went down 51%. And that was because, the theory was because students weren't able to meet up, text to meet up. So the difference between that and this is what's proposed is that Bentonville West did allow the students to use cell phones between classes and at lunch, and even in instructional time at times. It gave teachers some flexibility. This legislation would not give that flexibility for instruction. It does have some exemptions, but not for instruction. In fact, it specifically strikes it out of the code. But it will be very popular. I don't see a whole lot of pushback. Bentonville West did not have much pushback. Again, the lack of any kind of flexibility there might be an issue for some, but this will be a popular proposal.
Some interesting data there, certainly from some of those pilot programs. We'll see if that follows when it goes statewide, if it passes. Now to another topic that's making some waves not only here in Arkansas, but nationally as well. Governor Sanders wants to implement work requirements for some Medicaid recipients. And before we discuss this, let's go ahead and watch a clip of the governor making her announcement this past week on Tuesday.
The requirement is simple. If you want to receive free health care paid for by your fellow taxpayer, able-bodied working age adults have to work, go to school, volunteer, or be home to take care of their kids. 220,000 able-bodied working age adults in Arkansas receive free health care courtesy of the Arkansas taxpayer. It cost us more than $2.2 billion each year and growing. Of those recipients, estimates show that nearly 90,000 have no job. Most Arkansans work hard to pay for their health insurance, but many of these healthy adults don't work at all and receive it for free. That is not how the system should work.
Andrew, I want to go ahead and start with you because we've seen something like this attempted in the last decade. Give us some background on this. What happened last time and what makes this time different?
Yeah, this is not the first time Arkansas has tried work requirements for the Medicaid expansion. Under former Governor Asa Hutchinson, the state had tried a similar program, and about 18,000 people lost coverage under that. And eventually that program was blocked by a federal judge and also by the Biden administration over concerns about the way it was implemented and where people were able to connect with the infrastructure in place for it, and also ultimately achieved its goal. It's going to be a little different in terms of the way it's structured, but I think you're going to see some of the same complaints come up, but also coming at a time where politically more favorable environment for these kind of proposals. You've got the Trump administration in right now that's been generally supportive of this idea, and Republicans in control of both houses of Congress.
And there was talk about expansion, and the governor, Steve, said that she's not going to do away with expansion here, as in other states that seems to be something that they're angling for.
The private option, as it was originally called, and now what our home, is totally baked into the Arkansas healthcare system. It would be very, very difficult to stop that. This was tried before under the Hutchinson administration. It did have a lot of hiccups. There was a little bit of bureaucracy, and not that many people ended up going to work. But what the administration is saying is we've learned some lessons. There won't be a hard cutoff of benefits. There'll be a lot of coaching, a lot of working with the recipients. So necessarily the principle remains the same, but will the execution be different? That will be what will determine how successful this is. And again, the legal issues. Does it get through the court cases that will inevitably follow?
Steve, I want to now discuss a story that you wrote this past week on a controversial bill that a Senate panel advanced this past week that's being called an anti-affirmative action bill. The bill sponsor, Dan Sullivan, said this is similar to a bill he tried to pass a couple of years ago. So what are the details of this bill that people should know about?
Well, it's passed the Senate with 24 votes. It's now in the House. So basically it would end discrimination and preferential treatment in situations with race or gender, with some exceptions for gender. It's basically an anti-affirmative action bill where preferences that would benefit a certain race in particular, like for example, programs that encourage or provide scholarships for African American teachers to teach in African American places. This would expand the population so that basically it would not just target any kind of different racial group. So again, it was passed very easily in the Senate. Democrats were opposed as well as one Republican, Senator Alan Clark, who said basically, I like it in principle, but there are times when you might need to do something. For example, African American students, especially black males, tend to do better statistically when they have a black teacher. And he said we might need to be able to maintain that, and this bill would make that probably something that would not be legal.
Andrew, is this something that it passed the House, as Steve just mentioned, or excuse me, passed the Senate? Is this something that you're hearing will pass the House as well, or will there be more opposition on that side than there was on the Senate side?
Well, that remains to be seen. 2 years ago, it got through the Senate, so it's not a surprise seeing it get through again. The House is where it faced a lot of resistance, a lot of questions, and not just from Democrats, but also from some Republicans who are concerned about the broader impact it will have. The other issue is some of the concerns that were raised during the debate on it. Senator Clark Tucker had raised some concerns about it doesn't define preferential treatment and the impact that could have, the way it's applied. I think that's going to be something that you're going to see come up in terms of discussion on this and whether or not there need to be any amendments. So I think the House is where we're going to be watching it very closely to see what happens. The governor has not really stated whether her administration supports this, and that's also something we're going to be watching as well too.
And Steve, before we let you guys go, this has been a session where we haven't had yet a LEARNS, a prison reform, a net metering. This seems to be one where it's a slower roll, so to speak. But we know that every session has, its set of legislation that will cause some stirs. This one already causing one. Anything on the horizon to be watching for in the next couple of weeks that people should be aware of?
I'd watch higher ed. I think there will be a proposal from Governor Sanders of basically a LEARNS light for higher ed. Last session was revolutionary, transformative for education, whether you liked it or not. It was humongous changes for K-12 education. This session there will be less so, but there will be significant changes for higher ed. The funding formula will encourage workforce-related classes, technical certificates, that kind of thing, so watch for higher ed.
All right. That is all the time we have for today, but thank you so much, Andrew DeMillo with the Associated Press and independent journalist Steve Braun. We know both of you are so busy right now with the active legislative session. We appreciate your insights and all the details you can share with all our viewers out there. So thank you again for your time. All right. Coming up next, more of Arkansas Week. Stay with us. Welcome back. Arkansas farmers are struggling, simply put. And despite record yields last year, many growers ended 2024 in the red, and some of the lucky ones just barely broke even. The U of A Division of Agriculture reports that with continued high input prices, low commodity prices, and the possible resumption of a trade war with China, this year will likely prove just as challenging. Joining us to discuss this and much more is Extension Rice agronomist Jared Harkey. Jared, thank you for joining us remotely, as we know that you have been going all around the state of Arkansas right now to gather feedback and have conversations with growers. What can you share with us as you continue to extend out and try and outreach and talk with these folks who are struggling and find out what you all could do to help them?
At this point in time, the sentiment and the attitude is as poor as I've seen it in my career, unfortunately. As you already touched on, the direction is, from an economic standpoint, is going the wrong direction with the income that we're struggling with. Again, it's a good thing that we did have excellent yields in the 2024 season, because it turned out that we needed every bit of it. We're going through a period now where we certainly had concerns back to 2022 as our the prices of our inputs began to rise dramatically, as so many other inputs did. Everyone can feel it at home, and certainly still feeling it. But as those rose, we at least at that time did see some increase in commodity prices to help offset some of those increases. we've unfortunately now reached a situation where, while some of those input prices have improved a little bit, the prices growers are receiving for these crops have dropped dramatically in comparison. So we've reached an inverse where there's not a clear direction to turn in terms of making profitability and the likelihood of making it to another year of farming.
Some farmers had decent yields, but they're still deciding to throw in the towel. What will it take to keep people in the industry even after what is perceived as being a successful year with their crop?
At this point, there are a lot of moving parts to this. There's got to be some recovery of commodity prices. We're obviously not in the short term going to see additional drops in our input prices. So, coming from the lending side or providing some more leverage in that way, or improvement in interest rates being offered, or again, commodity prices increasing is what it's going to take. And we're on the threshold of losing a sizable percentage of growers going into this year. A lot of those decisions haven't yet been made, with this being delayed, hoping anything might improve situations, but a number are electing to right now early exit from the agriculture industry, with the common refrain there being, I have no choice but to get out now. I can't afford to lose everything I've worked for to this point in my life and career. I'm going to have to get out now. And that's a pretty dark and daunting time to be going into. Again, we've had struggles over recent years, but this is on a whole new level, not seen or discussed for decades.
Any other external factors affecting farmers and growers out there? Energy prices, anything else that are adding on or piling on in a sense, along with some of the things you've already mentioned?
Well, it's always important to remember that we compete on a world market, and there are always a lot of, without getting overly specific about some of the things going on around the world, where we do find ourselves continuing to compete. We hold ourselves to a very high production standard in the way that we regulate ourselves and our production practices and our management, and that can at times lead to us having higher production costs than those we're competing with around the world. And that puts us in a difficult position, increasingly so now, as we can be undercut by production in other locations, other countries around the world. And that continues to be another point of emphasis, particularly for me on the rice side. Certainly I'm speaking across commodities and crops, soybeans, corn, cotton, as well, but especially on the rice side. Arkansas produces 50% of the rice in the United States, but we're a very small percentage of the overall rice produced in the world. And we're good at what we do, and we are efficient, but our standards of production do lead to us having higher priced rice relatively, and that's becoming, again, an increasing struggle to compete.
$16+ billion industry, largest in the state, the ag sector. What needs to happen with the farm bill being worked on and being discussed by Senator John Bozeman, Congressman Rick Crawford locally here, having big hands in this, but what needs to be done with that bill to help this vital part of our state's economy?
It's dated to a point now. The world we were living in 2018, the last time we had a truly new farm bill, is just not the same world of agriculture and ag economy that we were living in at that time. So it's really updates to the fundamental workings of agriculture in general, but certainly from our side, from row crop production agriculture, to bring some of the commodity price references, things like that, to where we are today. Our, again, total input costs for crops and what our break-even prices are for crops, and the prices we're seeing of commodities today. All that needs to be brought up to date to where we are today and seemingly going forward, so that so many of those existing mechanisms that are there within the Farm Bill will work as intended going forward. But it's just become dated to this point, so we need those critical updates to reflect today's reality.
97% of farms in Arkansas family-owned. This has traditionally been an heirloom industry, passed down generation to generation. What's going to happen to the industry itself if families are getting out of this and it's not being passed down anymore?
So that's an interesting development. We, year after year, again, we're still talking farmed by family farms, but so much of our farmland today is rented from, again, typically from, those who did it one time farm, but the majority of it is rented ground. So that's an increasingly consistent expense that those who remain actually active farming are having to deal with on an annual basis, and really owning less and less of the land that they operate on. So obviously there's not an easy fix to that, but that's a continually increasing cost in production agriculture. Again, as the industry shrinks and more people move away from the agriculture industry and, out of the rural areas of Arkansas. So it continues to be a struggle. So it's really asking those who are still here to pick up and farm and rent more ground, putting even more strain on those operations to make the math work to continue in the business.
University of Arkansas Extension Rice agronomist Jared Hartke. Jared, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Safe travels as you continue to make your way around the state, and we'll talk with you next time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, that is it for Arkansas Week. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and Little Rock Public Radio.